Well, welcome to this week's podcast, AccuWeather's Everything Under the Sun. I'm joined in the studio by Andy Robb, my producer. Hey, Andy.
Hey, how are you?
Good. I'm doing good. And Ken Prell.
Hi. That's it.
That's all it is.
Just Ken Prell.
You're just a guy.
That's all.
I like that I
Yeah.
never give you a title.
I'm the director of audio here at AccuWeather.
Ken's in charge. He's my boss, and I always just say, and it's Andy, our producer, and Ken. But anyway, this week, guys, we are talking about weather folklore. Do you guys have any favorite pieces of what? You probably don't hear it very often, because with me working in weather, I always hear people's old sayings, like that they'll bring up when I'm out, like at the grocery store or random places.
The only thing that I can really think of is when you hear somebody say, well, it's going to rain because my knee's swelling up. Or
And they have to say it
something
in
like
that voice.
that. Yeah, they got to say it in an old-timey...
That's old Andy.
That's
Yeah.
old Andy.
Yeah.
Someday is going to be sitting over in the chair. It's kind of cold in here.
That's the
Where's
one...
my TV switcher?
I would say that's the one that I've heard probably the most, but
Right.
I've never really memorized it or explored it in detail, so I'd be curious to know more about that.
Right. Well, we are going to be sitting down with AccuWeather Network morning meteorologist Bernie Rayno and Becky DePodwin, also a meteorologist here at AccuWeather. And we're talking about some different folklore and whether or not, because there is some truth in some of those, so I think it's kind of interesting. Some of them are just ridiculous. So we're going
Those
to...
are the ones I want to hear about.
Those are the ones you want to know about. So we're going to be talking about that. And then also, this is a pretty new, interesting, forward-thinking way of forecasting. And it comes to us from our second interview today, which is Mike Smith. And he used to be a meteorologist here at AccuWeather for years.
And we had him on a prior episode to talk about the Joplin tornado.
Right. He talked about Joplin tornado and tornado warnings. You may want to go back and check out that episode if you haven't, because he's done some research into tornado warnings. But now his new thing is disease casting, actually figuring out where and what kinds of disease outbreaks may occur. And they have models and everything, all kinds of information that goes into it, like sociological information as well as weather information and all kinds of components.
It's very interesting stuff. So, yeah, it's definitely an interview you want to stay tuned for.
Yeah, it'll be
Right.
great to have him back on the show once again.
Right. So all that is coming up, so stay with us.
From AccuWeather's global headquarters in State College, Pennsylvania, it's Everything Under the Sun. Here's your host, Regina Miller.
Well, today I'm joined in the studio by Bernie Rayno, meteorologist Bernie Rayno of the AccuWeather Network, and also meteorologist Becky DePodwin. And I invited you guys in because I thought that it would be fun to have a conversation about weather folklore. Because we've all heard different phrases, different expressions over the years, and I thought, you know what? Let's kind of break apart some of those and take a look at them. So thanks for talking to me today, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Ladies first.
Ladies first.
Yes, that's why I was waiting. And, Bex, I'm a good friend with Bex.
Yeah.
We call her Bex.
Bex.
We have
It's kind of a cool name.
Yeah, well, we have an opportunity every year. AccuWeather goes to the American Meteorological Society, our yearly meeting. So we get a chance to represent AccuWeather in the meteorological community, and that's when I pretty much spend most of my time with Becky.
And you guys are getting
Yeah.
ready for that, because when we sat down here, you guys were talking about the
Hard to
trip
believe.
and planning that, because it won't be long now.
2 months, yeah.
2 months,
It's always a good time.
Yeah, this year it's in Phoenix.
Which is great, because you're going there in
Hey,
January.
that's one of the reasons why we like going. If we can escape 1 week of winter.
Right.
And I think last year we were in, where was it, Bex?
It was Austin, Texas.
Austin,
and when I walked
yes.
on the plane in State College, it was below zero
Yeah.
here. And when I walked off, it was 55 or 60, and it was the most glorious thing ever.
I know.
So that's part of it.
Yeah, so it's not up in the outer reaches of North Dakota this
They
year. You guys
typically
get
have
to
it in warm weather
Right.
locations, thank goodness.
Right, exactly. So, well, I thought today we'd talk about some weather folklore, and I thought I'd start by asking you guys, do you guys have any favorite pieces of weather folklore that, you kind of, like a rule of thumb kind of thing that you're like, hey, that one works pretty good?
Ooh, ones that work well?
Yeah, do you have any that, well, you know what, we'll talk about both. I know, Becky, I know you've got one that's kind of a little bit of a pet peeve one that you've got.
Well, 2 actually, and they're both pretty quick. It's the lightning doesn't strike the same place twice, which is absolutely false. Lightning does often strike the same place twice. In fact, tall buildings like the Sears Tower or the Empire State Building will often be struck multiple times in a minute in a storm.
Right, because
So-
they're the highest point.
Right. And lightning tends to strike high points. So that's kind of the rule of thumb is don't be near anything tall. Don't be the tallest person outside and really just get to shelter. And if lightning has struck there, it can't strike again.
Right. And it's because that one has kind of gone on and evolved to be like about just bad luck at anything,
Right.
so people kind of use that as a regular kind of expression when something bad happens. Oh, lightning can't strike. Well, yeah, it can strike in the same place twice. So that one definitely is not a good one. That's why we say don't hide under a tree or the tallest thing in the field. So I have one that doesn't work that I thought was really kind of funny, and I had heard, since we're talking about the ones that don't work, I tried this one on the air. Have you guys ever heard the one about an egg will balance on its end during the equinox?
Yeah, I've heard that all the time.
Did you ever try it?
No, I just assume it's ridiculous.
So you were
So I
better than
never
me.
tried
Yeah,
it.
you
Yeah,
were
I was
smart.
Yeah, I was like, I remember seeing it. Sometimes you hear these things.
Right.
And I'm always taught to be careful about being no way, because in the world of weather,
Right.
we're taught, well, wait a minute, look at it, think about it, don't react, always think, and then come back. But that one was, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Right, because there are some things in nature that have made sense
Absolutely.
over the years. Now, that one I actually tried on the air one time because I thought, you know what, I actually got a whole dozen eggs because I was like, okay, I just want to see if it's a fluke. So I tried a couple of eggs and no, they will not. It has more to do with the shape of the egg. It has nothing to do with the equinox, So then we just made omelets later and had a great old time that morning at work. Do you have any, Bernie, that you have said, you know what, this one works?
You know what? When I first got to AccuWeather many years ago, there's no need to date myself. We always had one in forecasting during the winter time when a fresh snow would fall and the snow was on the trees. If the snow melted off the trees, that meant the next storm brought rain. If it blew off the trees, that meant this next storm would be snow. Now, did that one work all the time? No, but you can see some rationale for it. You have to take some liberties on it. But the thought is, well, if it's melting off the trees, that means warmer air is coming in out ahead of the next storm that would likely bring rain. But however, if they're behind the storm, colder air is coming in, there's wind, it would keep it cold. So if it blow off the trees, the next storm would be snow. But it's
Right.
It
can change.
It
There's
could
some
change.
variables there, that can change.
Yeah.
But I can see where it makes sense because you think about, okay, where we're at in, the mid-latitudes, northeast, and where if you're getting it to blow off the trees, that means that system went through, and
colder
now
air is
we've got
coming
that
in,
northwesterly wind probably kicking in. So I can see
think
where
of
that would be
all
case.
the weather folklores that I do tend to pay attention to are ones that pertain to nature and animals, or acorns, or there are certain folklore that pertains to animals and natures, and like I remember 1 year acorns, 2010, lots of acorns, and I think if you think about it, nature understands, and nature, because it has to survive, or because there's no way that it can mitigate nature or the outside world, that they have a heads up, or the system has a heads up on what's coming. Now, I don't know how you prove some of those, but you can kind of see, if you rationalize it, when it comes to natures or animals, how certain folklores, there may be some rationale for it.
Right.
But I can't think of any offhand except that acorn one, where I remember 1 year there was a lot of acorns, and it was a cold, and of course when you have the cold, you could have a snowy winter.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I have one that's a rule of thumb. And I know Becky and we've talked about this one before because you said you've used this one as well. But the red at night, sailor's delight.
Oh, sure.
Red in the morning, sailor's warning is one of my favorites. And that's one of those nature ones. And so you were saying you were on a cruise, I think, when we were last talking about it, Becky, and how you actually saw it in action.
Yeah, it was really neat. I mean, thankfully for us, it was calm, but it was a red, beautiful sunset, and the next day was absolutely gorgeous sailing weather. So I think that one's absolutely true, and sailors have been using that for centuries.
Right, because you figure they didn't have models back then.
No, or radar.
So, or
anything.
radar, or anything. So you really had to watch the weather. And like on that one, I think it's interesting when you think about it, because, you know, I've really this one actually has been around since the Bible. This is in Matthew 16:2-3. Jesus actually talks about the red sky at night. So this has been around for thousands of years. But when you think about it, it makes so much sense, at least when you're thinking about the mid-latitudes.
Sure.
So when you have a sunrise or a sunset and you've got the sun at a low angle, so if it's clear between you and the sun, so it's sunrise, and if it's clear between you and the sun, then it's reflecting off the clouds on the other side of you. So at sunrise, and you've got that sun at a low angle, it's reflecting off the clouds on the other side of you to the west. That's
Which is the next storm. Yeah.
Storms from the west, because
Exactly.
our storms move west to east. But at sunset, if you got a clear sky between you and the sunset, and it's reflecting off those clouds on the other side of you in the east, that's a departing storm. So that one to me makes a lot of sense.
And there was something that happened to me just a couple of weeks ago. It was funny. My wife had her friend over at my house, at our house.
Did you say her house?
I said
is
our
it
house.
decorated in things you like,
Well,
or is
yeah.
it decorated
I
completely
live there,
in?
and
Do you have a room?
one could argue I pay rent. But I remember it was the summertime, and my friend, my wife's friend, had some kind of operation that she was in a major accident. So I think she had some replacement knees. But she would tell me, "Oh, is it going to rain?" I said, "It's not going to rain." Now the problem was I didn't look at the radar. I knew there was something around, but I think, well, the odds of it hitting us.
Yeah.
And she said it's going to rain. I can tell my bones are absolutely killing me. I said, "Oh, here we go." You know,
Yeah.
people tell you that.
Well,
all
you
the time.
do hear that.
Yeah, and you know what? 5 minutes later, it rained.
Well, and people.
And by the way, it
swear
was
by
brought.
that.
It was.
I bet they never let you
they
live
love
that
one.
down,
Yeah.
meteorologist
Oh,
Bernie
yeah. I don't have a
Rayno.
meteorology degree, and I'm right. Yeah, I got that one. So that's an example of some folklore that I think is rooted in some science.
Right, and that one actually, I think, is barometric pressure has
Absolutely.
an impact on how your joints feel if you have arthritis and that type of thing. And I was thinking too about when you're talking about something that's happening to a person physically, like your bones aching or something like that, is when your hair gets frizzy or curly hair will droop at different times, and so there's too much moisture, like maybe it's going to rain if your curly hair is like kind of drooping. Now, Bernie, does
notice
not
I'm
run
ducking
into
my
that
head.
problem,
As they've been talking about the
Bernie.
hair, I've been like,
you have a
well,
great
here
bald
we
head,
go.
Bernie. So
I'm
but-
like sinking lower and lower.
But that one works because when you think about it, early instruments used a human hair to measure the moisture in the atmosphere. So when you think about that, well, that one makes sense because it will elongate, I think, with moisture. And then it kind of shortens up, if there's not much moisture in there. So what about when people just say the cold makes you sick? Like, because everybody hears, bundle up, you're going to catch your death, you're going to get sick.
So that's not really related to the weather, I don't think. It's more related to the fact that when it's cold outside, you don't have the windows open, you're closed in spaces where there's not a lot of great air circulation, and so germs just travel a lot quicker and a lot easier. I think once you are sick, it may be a little more difficult to recover because even your mood can be impacted by the weather, which can then have an impact on your physical well-being. So I think there's a lot of correlations, but not actually a lot of causation between the cold and being sick.
Right. And actually, you're kind of ending up in the same, especially around the holidays where everybody's enclosed in
That
the
too.
winter with a bunch of people visiting and coming and going. And so you're bringing germs into an enclosed space. So
Traveling and planes and trains.
Yes.
There's just a
Almost
lot
every
of germs
year,
going on there.
every year, I end up sick after the AMS.
Oh, every year.
Every
Do you
year,
remember
coming
last
home.
Oh, yeah.
I had an ear infection last
Yep,
year.
last
Awful.
2 years ago, I got sick
Yep.
coming home, and then Becky had an ear infection that got very bad while we were out there, and a lot of
wow.
it is, it could be a number of things, but
hands.
certainly you're enclosed in a plane.
Enclosed.
Yeah.
You're enclosed, and plus you're also enclosed, like because theirs are usually in the winter, don't they?
Always in the
Usually
winter.
Yep.
AMS is in the
Yep.
winter, so people
Always
think
in
it's
the winter.
because it's
Yep.
cold weather season, but it's actually the fact that you're more enclosed
Yep, that's
in the
it.
winter is going to be more of a problem. Have you guys ever heard the woolly bear or the
Yes.
woolly worm caterpillar? That
I've
one.
heard it, but to this day, I never paid attention to it to understand how the whole woolly worm folklore works.
Right. Well, I looked into this because I thought this one was an interesting one. This is another one of those ones that I was just fascinated about because it's nature, and you think, well, they say that if there's more black, it's going to be a worse winter. If there's more brown, then it's going to be a milder winter. And depending upon where the stripes are, that's the other part of it, is if you've got more black in the center of the woolly worm, then the middle part of the winter is not going to be so bad. Like if there's black on either end, then the beginning and the end of the winter are going to be worse. So they have a whole spectrum of things that go
And I
along
have
with
seen
this woolly
more
worm.
woolly worms lately.
Have
It's
you?
fun. Oh, in the last couple of weeks, I've seen them all over the place. So now I'm listening intently.
Okay.
So keep going. Don't let
here's-
me interrupt
here's
you.
What,
Go ahead.
Here's what I've found out about this. So it actually is not based on the upcoming season. It is actually, so it's not predicting a bad winter or a mild winter. What it does tell you a lot about is the previous season on how long the woolly worm caterpillar or the woolly bear caterpillar has been feeding, whether there's been good feeding, like if it's been a good season for whatever is their food resource. And then it also tells you about the age of the caterpillar, because they will molt up to 6 times during their lifetime, so that will leave brown rings. So really, the woolly bear caterpillar isn't really telling you anything about the upcoming season. All you learn about them is how old they are and whether they had a lot to eat recently.
I was looking forward to hearing this, and now you've just.
I just totally ruined it
oh,
for
well,
you.
so much
didn't
for
I?
that.
Yeah. What about this one? You can tell the temperature by cricket chirps. Have you ever heard that?
I've never heard that.
Okay, well, we have a little clip on this from The Big Bang Theory.
What's that?
Sounds like a cricket.
Hang on. Based on the number of chirps per minute and the ambient temperature in this room, it is a snowy tree cricket.
Oh, give me a frickin' break. How could you possibly know that?
In 1890, Emile Dolbear determined that there was a fixed relationship between the number of chirps per minute of the snowy tree cricket and the ambient temperature, a precise relationship that is not present with ordinary field crickets.
So anyway, I love that was in The Big Bang Theory, that they actually spent some time talking about this. But so what has been found out about this is crickets are actually really good thermometers. They chirp faster when it's warm, and they do slower when it's cold. So here's the theory with this. So if you add if you count their chirps for 14 seconds, then add 40.
Okay.
You should have the temperature in Fahrenheit.
So say that
outside.
again. You count the
So
chirps.
you count their chirps for 14 seconds.
14, and you add 40.
And you add 40,
Okay.
and you will get a pretty good ballpark sense of the actual
By
temperature.
the way, I'm a huge Big Bang Theory, and I don't remember that. Yes, I have to do this. Regina.
I know, because
Regina.
Bernie does that all the time.
I love the big Sheldon. Penny.
Penny. So anyway,
Yeah.
so that was Sheldon talking about that. And so anyway, that's proven to be pretty good. So in our house, I don't even have thermometers, and I don't use Alexa. I just have my own cricket.
You're going to let him indoors, huh?
I'm going to let him indoors. I
Okay.
named him Clyde, and then I just find out what the
I am
temperature is
going
by
to try
sending
that.
Try that
Now,
one.
obviously, I'm going to have to wait. But
Right.
I never. But again, that's in and that has been verified. To be
Well, it's a
Somewhat
ballpark. It's a
ballpark.
ballpark. It's
Okay.
actually I'm going to tell you the
Yeah,
origin of
go
this, so
ahead.
then you know. Amos Dolbear, he was a noted American physicist and inventor. He published his findings in an 1897 article
Makes sense.
that was titled "The Cricket as a Thermometer." So
it is interesting when you read. For example, I'm a history buff, and one of my favorite historical times was the American Revolution, and one of my favorite founding father is John Adams.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've read some of his books or seen the HBO miniseries. And
no, but I'm going to. I didn't know about it.
Were so in tune with the weather that they kept detailed observations, and some of the observations and even the forecasting theories they made were so ahead of their time. And I think a lot of it was because of how they were in tune with the nature and they saw things like this. So it makes sense to me that people back in that time used whatever instrument that they could to figure out things. So that's kind of interesting.
Think about it, because you didn't have we were just talking about this before we got started. Computer models.
You didn't have
the
anything.
reliance on all those things. And so you had more time to notice what was going on in nature.
Yeah.
So I can see, because you said about Adams, and then also, I mean, you think about Benjamin Franklin.
I mean, he was amazing what he did.
Amazing.
I mean, he's the one that figured out the whole Gulf Stream. The nor'easter came from him. I mean, he was amazing. All of the
and not having
with nothing.
Instruments
it's
to
just
really
observations.
Yes.
And I think when you are the one that you're not using anything else but your mind, you figure it out. And that's what they did. And they were amazing what all of the information that a lot of their theories that they put forth about the weather and how correct they were.
Right, because they were observing it. And I know there was two more that I wanted to talk about that are those observations. And I think, Becky, that we were talking about the fact that like this is an old expression, a ring around the sun or moon means that rain or snow is coming soon. And so there's some truth to that one, right?
Yeah, I mean, essentially a ring around the sun or the moon basically means that the light is being refracted through ice crystals, which is indicative of incoming clouds. So it's a really simple explanation for that, and that one's a pretty good rule of thumb as well. If you look up at night and there's a halo around the moon, you're probably going to have rain in the next 12 to 24 hours.
Right. And a lot of times it's those really high cirrus. It's the first clouds to arrive. Those blow off cirrus, so those are the first ones that show up.
And a good precursor to a snowstorm.
Exactly.
Same thing, where it clears out, you get the fresh injection of cold air, and all of a sudden clear skies, light winds, dry air, and then you get the high clouds. Oftentimes that is a precursor as well.
Right. So some of those are really good. One more that I just want to mention before we kind of close out is opening of windows before a tornado hits.
I'll let Becky do that one. She's already smiling with a look
because
in her eyes.
They used to think that
they did.
They used to.
People still do. People still think that opening the windows before a tornado hits will relieve the pressure and save your home, and it's so far from the truth and can actually cause someone to be injured because they're taking the time to run around their house and open these windows. That
so
has nothing
dangerous.
to do with it. I mean, yes, the pressure does drop in a tornado very significantly, but that's not what's going to hurt you. It's the wind and the debris that is driven by the wind. And that does not matter whether the windows are open or closed. Like, if the winds are that strong, the house is going to be destroyed no matter what. So don't waste the time going around to open the windows. Just get to shelter, get to the basement, get to an interior room.
Right. I agree, because they used to think that the house was imploding because it probably looked like that. But
probably,
it was the wind
sounds like that.
just
Feels like
taking
that.
it down,
Yep.
So, well, thanks so much. I really appreciate you both sitting down with me. This was a fun topic.
This was fun.
It was.
I like Bernie's at the end, just it was a little delayed.
I think he's a bit tired. It's been
he is a bit tired.
It's been a long day for him so far.
Bernie always has long days in here where he comes in and he's here for like 12 hours before he heads out. So we're just happy that he was able to take the time to sit down with us, and Becky as well. And that topic was interesting. Now, if you're somebody who's like, you know what, I don't want to look outside to see what's going on.
Or if you don't trust your own knee.
If you don't trust your own knee and you don't trust crickets or woolly bears, maybe you want to check out some technology that we have here at AccuWeather. It's right there on your phone.
Yeah, download the AccuWeather app today. Of course, it also features MinuteCast, our exclusive hyper-local minute-by-minute precipitation forecast for your area.
Right, and next up we have a pretty exciting new technology coming out. It's called DiseaseCast.
That's right.
Well, I'm joined on the phone by Mike Smith. He was the former senior vice president of AccuWeather Enterprise Solutions, a storm warning expert, author, and his newest venture is a cell bio forecasting disease. Thank you for joining me on the phone, Mike.
It's my pleasure, Regina.
I was calling because I wanted to find out about this new, never-before-done venture that you're involved in.
We have been working on this for the last 7 years, and the theory is to forecast and warn of diseases or an epidemic in much the same way that weather science warns of a hurricane. And if you're warned, you can take precautions. For example, if we tell you a couple of weeks in advance that the probability of a flu outbreak is high or very high, you want to make sure you've had your flu shot. Now, you want to get your flu shot anyway, especially your children. Make sure your children are vaccinated. But we may be able to give you a little extra nudge through our forecast, and by doing that, we hope to save lives, just like meteorologists save lives in tornadoes and hurricanes.
Well, Mike, I was wondering, so you say about a certain outbreak. So give me kind of a scenario on how weather relates to the disease outbreak.
Well, they call me a cell bio's chief biometeorologist. And for example, we know certain types of weather cause more mosquito eggs to be laid and more mosquitoes to hatch. Those are typically very wet conditions, very warm conditions, and pools of water, puddles and things like that during the season when the mosquitoes are laying their larvae. We also know the conditions during which diseases like Zika and West Nile are most likely to be bad. So we can forecast greater than normal numbers of mosquitoes. We can forecast the conditions when, say, West Nile is most likely. Therefore, by using weather science and other non-weather related tools, we can make a very accurate, not perfect, just like meteorology, not perfect, but very accurate forecast of where the probability of mosquito-borne diseases are greatest.
So, Mike, would that kind of look like you're forecasting maybe for a geographical area that you're seeing there's going to be a lot of rain over the next couple of weeks? Do you end up like talking to an entomologist as well about hatching, or like what other things come into play with the weather to then have the disease outbreak forecast?
Well, these are actually computer algorithms that we've developed over the last 6 to 7 years by talking to entomologists, to epidemiologists, and the scientists who actually know all of these factors. Let's take another type of illness that is worse during flooding as one example, and that's waterborne illnesses. For example, if you know there's going to be flooding, we can forecast a much higher than normal probability of waterborne illnesses. So we urge people to stay away from floodwaters because they can overwhelm water systems, and so that raw sewage can flow. It can mix into rivers and streams. People on some occasions unwittingly get into that water and they'll catch a waterborne illness. And so there are all types of things we can do, whether it's flu, waterborne illnesses, ticks, whatever. We know what those conditions are, and we can warn people. And if you go to what's called DiseaseCast.com, you can see maps, much like weather maps that you see on TV, that forecast those diseases and their probability.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting. So I'm curious, you said, because it was kind of in development for 7 years, I think you said, with the algorithms. Is there a certain amount of statistics then embedded with that as well?
Yes. There are meteorological conditions, there are time of year, there are various statistics. I have a copy of all of that, and it fills a binder about 4 inches thick.
Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, before we started talking, you had been talking about hurricanes. Tell me what your disease cast might look like, or what you would be letting people know about.
One of the problems is that when people evacuate, all different types of people end up in the shelters. The problem is, you know whether your family's been vaccinated for the flu, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know whether the other people in the shelter have been vaccinated. And we know from past experience that flu and other types of diseases can spread to people who have done the right thing by evacuating, but are mixed into the population with people who have the flu. And if you haven't been vaccinated, you're going to get the flu also. So people that are displaced to, say, schools or community centers, it's part of an evacuation. You want to make sure you have what's called an N95 disease mask, antibacterial wipes, hand soap. Those things are very important to stay healthy when you're an evacuee. And that sort of advice is on the diseasecast.com site so that people are able to proactively protect their health when they're in a hurricane situation.
Wow, that's interesting because, I mean, you would typically think about, well, the hurricane, flooding, diseases related to that kind of thing, but it never would have occurred to me that where they evacuate to, they can get a whole new set of diseases. So that's interesting.
Exactly. And so that's what we try to do with diseasecast.com. We're trying to help the population, all of our friends and neighbors, stay healthy. And not only do we make the forecasts of diseases, there are blogs on how to protect yourself from each type of disease, especially if you're in a hurricane situation or something and you need to get things quickly. There's sort of a green bar across the middle of the site, and that will take you to your Amazon account, and you can buy right then and there what you need before you leave home or just to keep on hand.
Well, what gave you this idea, this brainchild? Because I'd never heard of anything like this, and you say that it really hasn't been done before.
It has not been done before in the history of humanity. I'd like to say it was my idea. It actually wasn't. Our CEO was in a Barnes & Noble in New York City in 2011, and he ran across a copy of my book, Warnings, The True Story of How Science Tamed the Weather. And as he was reading the story of how the storm warning system began, he said to himself, this guy did with tornadoes 50 years ago what we're trying to do with disease. He might be helpful to have on the team.
Wow.
So they contacted me, and I said, yes, I'd love to be on the team. I'm an investor in the company, but I very much believe that what we're doing is accurate and has the potential to save lives.
That's pretty cool. So he didn't even know you. He just found out about you from being in the bookstore.
Yes. He was in the bookstore, saw the copy of Warnings, thought the cover was very attractive, thumbed through a few pages and thought, this is really interesting, bought the book, read it, and got in touch with me.
That's great. That almost seems like divine providence to bring you two forces together.
Exactly. I've said that myself.
Right. I just wanted to ask about a couple of weather scenarios because, like blizzards. So what might blizzards look like as far as disease?
Well, one of the problems with blizzards is your family is very close together, and sometimes it's fun to hunker down with other people. And I know of situations, in fact, at least once in my own family, where we've all kind of gotten together to watch the snowfall. Well, again, you're getting people in your household who are not normally in that household. It is amazing to me that there are children in this country who have not been vaccinated for measles. There are people who do not get their flu shots. And so you end up having a similar problem that you do with hurricane evacuations. You get people who are not normally in your house, and if they haven't been vaccinated, then you can have a problem. So when you're getting ready to cook that chili that everybody wants to eat while they're watching the snowfall, make sure that everyone is washing their hands, make sure that proper cooking procedures are used, and that way you minimize the chance of disease spreading, even if it's just a cold, spreading from one person to another.
Right. In our house, it would be the Super Bowl. I'm sure that everything spikes during the Super Bowl because it's all finger foods and dips, and everybody's got their hands in it. So
they're double dipping the chips.
Right. Exactly. Well, thanks so much for talking to me about this, Mike. It's very interesting.
It's my pleasure, Regina.
Thanks to our guests, Mike Smith, Bernie Rayno, and Becky DePodwin. And next week's episode, we're pretty excited about. Actually, Andy is so excited that we have him in the other room. He is not even in the room.
I am very far back. Let me near the microphone, but yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited.
He was so excited that he was yelling, and we blew out 3 microphones while trying to conduct the interview. Let's tell him what it is, Andy.
We are going to be speaking with the executive producer of the one and only Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade coming up on next week's podcast. You're going to find out all about it as they approach their 92nd parade.
I know, so a big deal. Wow. And then every episode after that, until Christmas, we're just singing Christmas carols together.
Just hear those sleigh bells ringling, jing, jing, jingling.
I was going to say, when was this
Ken.
decision made?
Yeah, everybody but Ken gets to sing.
So I'm not going to win on The Voice anytime
so
soon?
we're all gonna.
Nobody's turning their chairs around.
We're all gonna stand around like the Peanuts, and Snoopy's gonna come out. We're gonna be...
Right. Loo, 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 loo.
There it is.
Yeah,
we'll leave it on that.
That is a voice of an angel.
There we go. So, okay, we digress, but we're so excited about this interview, so you'll want to check us out next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Be sure to subscribe to AccuWeather's Everything Under the Sun, giving you the stories behind the weather and so much more. New episodes every Thursday. Just search for AccuWeather on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or visit AccuWeather.com/podcast.